So as we continue with agriculture, we're going to go over types of farming techniques. So let's first look at the economic problems faced by farmers. And farmers are important. We need food. Um, and so it is important to support agriculture in a country to make sure you have enough resources. But it's also important to remember that there are other job sectors that need support as well. So some challenges for farmers in developing countries or less developed countries are that subsistence farmers need to feed an increasing number of people because of the rapid population growth that we know is a pattern in the less developed countries of the world. So where people are raising food for themselves and for their families, they are responsible for the growth of that food, and that population is increasing. So they have more children surviving, so they have more mouths to feed. So they have to have more food produced. The food supply can be increased through the intensification of production. So when they have access to modern fertilizers, pesticides, new crop varieties, irrigation, right, or pumping water in from an aquifer to a farm, they can increase their yields. They can also leave their land fallow or without crops growing on it for a shorter period of time, but that can lead to the loss of soil and the loss of soil nutrients, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And so here, by creating more terraces, they're able to grow more rice. Other challenges for farmers in developing countries mean that they now have to grow food to export instead of just eating. So because we have this international trade, we have a globalization of markets. Now, instead of maybe doing this really intensive labor just to feed themselves, they've switched to a monocrop so they can sell it and then they can purchase food in cities and in larger grocery stores. So that means that that they are changing the way they farm, and they are going to maybe lose the rich soil or lose the ability to continue it. Or if something goes wrong with a crop, they won't have the resources there to make sure that they are feeding themselves and their families. So, for example, consumers in developed countries are willing to pay high prices for fruits and vegetables that are normally out of season locally. So if you go to the grocery store, you could buy blueberries every single month of the year. You can buy strawberries every single month of the year. But here in Florida, strawberries are coming into season in the winter. So in summer, you shouldn't be able to get strawberries in Florida. They don't grow here. Look at where your food is coming from. It's coming from all over the world. So if you're getting blueberries, they probably were grown in the U.S. If you're getting them in late summer. But if you're getting blueberries in December, they probably were shipped here from South or Central America. And all of that is fine. We have a giant, large global economy. Clearly, our food will have that economy too. But we want to make sure that the people who are growing our food have enough resources for themselves as well. So like quinoa is a native grain. It's an ancient grain found in Peru. And it's become very popular here in the U.S. And one of the problems with selling quinoa to international markets is that the people who traditionally were eating quinoa really can no longer afford it. And so the trick is to support a global market, but make sure that the people growing your food or later making your cell phones or making your TVs, they have a decent quality of life too. In developed countries, so like here in the US and in Europe, we have a problem with overproduction. So commercial farmers suffer from low incomes because they can make more food than is demanded. So we talked about how much corn is sitting around. So if you're a corn farmer, you make more corn than the market can really afford to buy, and so you don't make as much money. We have low population growth, so you're not going to need much more. And so we end up subsidizing corn. So we pay farmers not to grow corn, or we guarantee a certain price. So if you can sell your corn for, 15 cents a bushel, and that's the highest price you can get for it, we might guarantee you 25 cents a bushel. And so we will give you the extra 10 cents a bushel to make sure that you can, keep your farm open and running. And I think that helping farmers out, subsidizing farms is a great idea. But if we subsidize the same crop for 10, 20, 30 years, I think we should be subsidizing changing crops. If we have to help out farming, if we have to subsidize the same crop for, 2 generations, maybe the time is to to start subsidizing, changing your farm to something different, something new that we need. We also have, oh, here we go, just like I was talking about, I didn't flip over soon enough. We also buy some of the surplus production and we can sell it or donate it to farmer governments. But overall, like, we grow too much of the same type of crop. And so we really should be subsidizing diversity in crops. And so we talk about diversity in people, right? And that countries with diverse ethnic populations tend to have greater creativity and a greater labor force. So diversity is good in human populations. Diversity is good in farming. In fact, like, the key to all of this class and AP Environmental in the spring really is diversity. Diverse people, diverse opinions, diverse crops, diverse energy sources. We don't want everything to be homogeneous. It doesn't work as well that way. Some different techniques that you need to know. Intercropping is when you farm a variety of plants at the same time. So this discourages a large quantity of one pest species. So maybe you have like a row of corn and a row of soybean next to it, and then maybe next to that you have alfalfa or potatoes. And so like every other row of plants is something different. And so you have to get specialized equipment to harvest them, but you get more nutrients in your soil, and it's less likely your crop will be laid to waste by either a fungus or an insect or like a nematode, a little microscopic worm in the soil. Polyculture are complex intercropping. So polyculture is when you're growing crops that mature at various times. And there's a couple of different polyculture methods, but you might be growing like corn with like pumpkin or squash underneath it. And the pumpkin or squash will shade the roots of the corn so you don't have to water it as much. It'll prevent weeds from growing. And then you harvest the squash and then you harvest the corn afterwards. We also like to look at some ways to sustain the soil. So sustainable agriculture and the organic movement in food started with the idea of conserving soil. And then later we started to look at the harmful effects of pesticides. But the truth is, a great deal of soil blows away, washes away, or loses its nutrients every single year. And we don't have as much soil as you would think. In some places, there's only a couple inches of really high quality farmable soil on that land. And so we really need to make sure it's still there. And even though soil is listed as a renewable resource, it can take thousands and thousands of years to replenish itself. So agricultural techniques that preserve the soil are going to guarantee that you can farm that land for a long time. So conservation tillage means you're only going to till beneath the topsoil to produce erosion. So really you're going to take like the crops that are there and you're going to mix them into the soil so you don't have a bunch of just soil on top of the ground. If you have just plain soil out there, when the wind blows it away. If the rain comes, it washes it away. If you have like the remains of chopped up plants there acting as like a weight or like a mulch to hold that soil down, you're not going to lose as much. Agroforestry is when you put some trees or grasses and crops together. This will improve soil fertility. So we also call it like shelter belting. So you've got a row of trees that holds the soil down at the end. So you're not getting as much erosion off the farmland. You can have a long-term crop going. So you could put Christmas tree rows in, right? You could do orchards, like apple orchards. So you could have another crop tree there. You could grow plants. You could have like maple for wood that you harvest every 10, 20 years. So you have a small long-term crop there. The roots hold the soil in, and they also prevent too much wind from whipping across the field. And so having that shelter belt of trees means that you're not going to lose as much soil due to erosion. And then crop rotation, which is definitely the most commonly used out of all of these, is when you maybe grow corn one year. So corn takes a lot of nitrogen out of the soil. So because it uses so much nitrogen, when you're growing corn, you have to put a lot of fertilizer in to make sure it gets enough. So if you have corn in the same field year after year after year, there's going to be very little nitrogen left, and then you have to keep adding more and more fertilizers. But if you take corn, you plant it in one field, the next year you put soybean there. Soybeans help create nitrogen in the soil because they have a fungus in its roots and a bacteria in its roots, and this bacteria breaks down nitrogen from the air and makes nitrogen available to plants. So if you're putting soybeans in there, you can sell the soybeans, so you're still growing a crop that you're making money off of, and you're fixing the soil, you're replenishing the nitrogen in the soil, and without having to add extra fertilizers. And then you could do the next year with alfalfa. So then you add alfalfa in. And alfalfa isn't necessarily eaten a lot by humans, but you can sell that as food for cattle. And so now you've put some more you put some more nitrogen back in that soil. And so every third year when you put corn there, it already has all of the nutrients it needs to grow, and you don't have to quite add as much. Contour plowing is like this picture here. Do you see how it kind of curves with the natural shape of the land? And that means you're going to lose less soil due to water and wind patterns, because you're not trying to put it in an exact straight row. When you fight the land, it makes it easier for soil to run off. And this is contour plowing with strip cropping going on. So in this case, you've got alternate crops. So here maybe they have wheat, and then they maybe have soy or alfalfa. And so they've used the contour plowing with the land, and they have different crops. So they're actually kind of doing crop rotation, but in a strip. So maybe they'll do the wheat here, alfalfa here, and then next year they'll move the meach down. So they're kind of applying 2 different agricultural techniques to help preserve their land. Terracing is common on steep slopes and mountain areas, and it's most commonly associated with rice, although you can do it for many crops. But it's famously associated with rice. And if you Google terrace farming, you're almost gonna completely only see pictures. So this will be in an area that's really mountainous or really hilly, so you don't have as much erosion. If you were just planting crops up here, all that soil would run down here to the bottom. So you're building terraces, so they act like steps, and it traps the soil and the water. And even if some runs off, at least it's running into a field. You'll be catching it as it goes. Some of the biggest problems we have with agriculture would be soil erosion. Soil erosion is the biggest problem. 1/4 of our agricultural lands lose more topsoil than they're forming. We lose about 2.5 centimeters per hectare every 20 years. And that's a lot because it takes a long time for soil to rebuild. And things like deforestation can increase that rate of erosion. Again, erosion is when topsoil is blown away or washed away by water. We also have mineral depletion. So when we're growing food to maximize profits, we don't always account for the good of the land and the soil's limitations. And so downtime doesn't allow you to make money. So we have, a conflict between making money and keeping the soil fertile so you can continue to farm it. It is currently worse in the tropical rainforest because the soil is such a poor quality, and the people that are moving in there, they don't really live there, so they're not invested if that soil is fertile in 20 years. What they really care about is making money as fast as possible, and then they don't care if they leave a mess behind. Soil salinization is when, usually in an arid or a semi-arid area, you're using irrigation, or again, you're pumping water in to water the crops. And when it gets really hot early in the day, the water evaporates quickly, and it leaves just natural minerals and salts that kind of dissolve here that kind of remain here on top when the water evaporates. And as the salt concentrations get too high, it increases the toxicity to plants. And things like fertilizers have salt in them too, so that makes it worse. And then desertification. This is a picture of land that maybe once had fertile soil, could grow crops, and with too much deforestation, too much erosion, it becomes a desert. And so now you can't grow crops at all in this land.